Hello, welcome to Mandibil. This is my part 14 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux' book, The Art of the Argument, Western Civilization's Last Stand. And last time I went over a few chapters called The Argument and, the Argument and Empiricism and the essential elements of the argument. Now, in the early chapters of the book, he stated what an argument is, and there's inductive and deductive, and there's about certainty and all sorts of things. Now he talks about the elements of an argument and lists 5 things that must be the case. So it's weird to me that these things are not combined in any way, right? I don't have the exact place, so you have to go back in the book yourself and find that where it's early, one of the early chapters where he says it has to be a value, a truth statement or a value statement, or and truth statement can be inductive or deductive, right? There's none other that is mentioned, right? And then this is the elements. So if this is an umbrella description of all kinds of arguments, how does value or truth, inductive or deductive, fit into this? How will I know from these elements, supposed elements of an argument, that they're either value or deductive, inductive? It's sort of completely disconnected, right? In my opinion, this is a sort of a game ender, right? I can't take this seriously, right? It's just like he's talking in this direction, then he starts to talk in another direction, and it's completely disconnected, and he's throwing words around these big terms that, existence and certainty and rationality and absolute and all sorts of stuff, right? Objectivity and empiricism. It's all one big gumbo, and there's no heads or tails in it. And generally, my way of handling, or sort of a large sort of overview of any kind of philosophical attempts of any kind, like dissertation or description books, whatever, is that I have the very strong sense that if you work from first principles, from metaphysics all the way up through epistemology and so on, it has to be simpler and simpler and simpler and simpler, right? It shouldn't go the other way. It shouldn't start from simple and then become more and more and more and more complex, right? Because if you're starting off with metaphysics, you're sort of looking at everything from a sort of reduction base of one way of seeing things, and then you categorize them, dichotomies and trichotomies and whatever. And then so if you're looking at a certain aspect of life, like argument, you should be able to reduce a lot of metaphysics, a lot of epistemology and so on, or clarify it in a way so that it almost pops out at the end what an argument is supposed to be, in a sort of logical, step-by-step notion that the reader is following. Okay, I guess this must be the case, but he's reasoning this way and the other way, so it must lead to this, and that must lead to this. This is the complete opposite, right? You're starting with the idea of an argument. That's basically sort of, you're making some words, so it sounds with your mouth, and they can contain some reference to objects and so on. And it shouldn't be more complicated than, it has to be, right? And now we are I am completely confused about what I have my own philosophy, thank God, right? But trying to understand what's going on in Stefan Molyneux' head around these things is like, it's like somebody throwing books at you, right? And while they fly past you, you try to read something. Okay, I can't read anymore. Oh, and then another book comes flying. It's something like this, right? I have no chance of understanding this. And even if I made some sense of it, I wouldn't trust it, because it's so confusing that I have to say that whatever conclusion I might arrive on based on this deconstruction, maybe, that is faulty because I have no way of navigating through all these weird statements and terms and, no definitions and anything. And the certainty and absolute is gone. We're not talking about that anymore, right? But these are the elements of the argument. But there's no reference to certainty or absolute or truth or value. There might be something that is truth in here. I think truth is mentioned, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken actually, but it's just like, what the fuck, right? It doesn't work. And an analogy to tennis, if appreciative is not going to crack it, right? It has to be better than that, because tennis is an agreement on certain ways to do things in a sport event. This can't serve as a valid or a sufficient example of this huge chunk of 5 bullet points of what entails the elements of an argument, right? I can't use this in my daily life, right? Okay, I have an argument. I have to go to the grocery store and get them to order a book to me, or whatever it is, right? Order me a new lawnmower, right? What do? It must be a rational proposition consistent with itself and empirical reality. Oh my God, is a lawnmower, is it consistent with itself? I'm not sure it's a consistent. It must make claims about empirical testable reality. But I'm just thinking of a lawnmower. I don't have the lawnmower with me at the moment. Can I test it? Well, I can't test it before I get it, right? So, and it must contain a null hypothesis. Oh my God. No, I don't have a null hypothesis. I have to call Stefan Molyneux. I need a lawnmower. Can you give me the null hypothesis for lawnmower? I mean, what the hell is this? It has nothing to do with how people work, right? This is like, everything people are doing will go to a grinding halt if anybody was going to work from these standards. And everybody will be asking each other, what do you think a proposition entails? Well, I don't know, but I think it might be this. Yeah, but then what about consistent, right? It has to be consistent with itself. Yeah, but what is consistent? But I don't know, but let's call Stefan Molyneux, right? Oh, man, right? You can't do this. It's ridiculous. It's unbelievable that you have no sense of reality when you're presenting something like this, right? You're living in some weird, abstract, universal, something up here in the clouds, right? And you're descending down to the peons to tell them how to behave, and then you're descending back up to the skies, right? Oh, not descending back up, ascending back up, right? Okay. And then there was this. There was another chapter. I didn't want to go too much into the argument and empiricism. It's so fluffy the way it's presented, right? Is talking down to people while calling it philosophy. Is talking down to sort of is not really into philosophical debates, really, right? He's into people who are not that smart, and then trying to convince them that he's freaking smart and he needs your money, right? Okay, but there's this one over here where he talks about how he learned how to play chess because there was a book that told him how to do it. Okay, so what I think he's going for here is that he wants to be the book you will reach for whenever you think, okay, I need to make a good argument now. The art of the argument. I have to take that down for myself. The big argument book. Oh, wow, Stefan Molyneux's argue book. Right? I think that's what he's going for. You're sort of implanting ideas in your head there, right? The argument is the chess game of society, and victory is civilization. Okay, I don't want civilization. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's see what the next bit is, and that is the argument and rights. And we are going through a lot of chapters here that the further I get into this book, the more frustrated I get about the way he argues for arguments, right? and it's sort of all over the place, right? Truth comes before existence in the chapter order and so on, right? And it's just like he said, okay, I have to write about this, and then he writes about it, and okay, that's chapter's done. Oh, I think I'll have to write about this, so that chapter is done, right? And it's not ordered in a way that makes sense. It's not completely confused, right? But I mean, if he was a student in my academy of philosophy, I would tell him you need to go back and get a grip on this, right? Because you do not understand basic philosophical things, and you are not living up to the standards that you want your so-called society to follow. You're not following your own example, or the example you want to present as a good way of arguing. You're not arguing that way in your book, right? And the order is it's out of order, and you are presenting something here, and then it just disappears. And the next time you tell about the elements of an argument, there's no reference to these structures of arguments back here. Why? You need to bring things together so people can understand what you're talking about, right? You can't argue in this fragmented way. It will have to leave the reader saying, I can't trust this. So it has to be more structured. It has to be rigid, right? And make sure that you don't use terms that are equated with other terms, right? Or any equivocation for that matter, right? So, okay, let's see. The argument and rights. Many political arguments take the form of claiming that a certain benefit is a human right. It is a human right to be educated, to receive health care, to achieve egalitarian outcomes relative to other groups, and so on. The challenge here is that any characteristic of human beings must apply to all human beings, not just some human beings. It also must exist contemporaneously of all human beings at the same time. The characteristic of mammals called mammary glands applies to all mammals, and not only to some mammals. All mammals can have mammary glands. Contemporaneously or at the same time, one mammal does not possess breasts at the expense of another. When one animal achieves value at the expense of another animal, this is called predation or parasitism. A lion achieves life at the expense of the life of its prey. Characteristics of matter, such as inertia, and gravity, must apply to all matter, not just some matter. These characteristics must also exist contemporaneously. In other words, all mass must possess the characteristics at the same time. I'm sort of wondering. He's trying to talk about this reality cut in stone, described by its categories, and the mammals defined by this and that, right? At the same time, the first thing, or one of the very first thing he said about argument is it is about trying to convince another person. Well, it's a specific tool, or you could even say it's a kind of manipulation you can do with human beings. It's not something you do with other parts of reality, right? There's nothing in the second law of thermodynamics, or the relativity, or anything that talks about anything about convincing other people of your truth, right? Nothing. So it's a bit of a sophist trick to talk about this stable and consistent reality, while all arguments are really about, according to Stefan Molyneux, is convincing another person, right? So what law of the universe, or what kind of empiricism, what kind of whatever you want to bring in, is used to convince, right? Because if the other part don't care about your reality or whatever you want to present, you're not going to convince. There's nothing that is there's no convincibility about an argument, right? There's nothing in it that has the convincing power. If the receiver don't care about your argument, the receiver don't care. That's it, right? So there's nothing that the argument as such brings that must convince somebody else of something, right? If I say that's an elephant, that itself doesn't convince anything about anything, right? And my friend beside me is going to say true or false, depending on his experience and maybe his need to lie or not, right? There's no convincing in it. What would I do? That is the elephant, and it must be, convincing to you, right? What would you refer to in your empirical, consistent, certain, rational, reasonable, reality that is actually convincing in nature, right? The only way you can do convincing is actually sophistry, right? Manipulation. You have to do something that lures the recipient into thinking there's some advantage about this statement. Otherwise, they don't care about it, right? If I said to you, yeah, well, if you travel 10,000 kilometers and jump up and down for 2 weeks, you can get an apple, right? Yeah, I would say, well, good luck with that one, right? But if I'm saying to you, well, if you do as I say, you might get pension for 50 years. Okay, that's convincing, right? I'm just pointing out that there has to be something else besides the bare minimum of an argument, right? Because in my book, I'm still working on this, right? But in my book, there's basically two kinds of arguments. There are propositions and everything else, right? It's very close that I'm about to say that even philosophy is a kind of sophistry, right? It's at least very close. Because why would you have any incentive to tell people about your philosophy if it wasn't because you wanted them to be like you, right? But why would you want them to be like you? Don't you accept them as they are? Why are you better than they are? So it's a kind of sophistry, right? At least there's something there. Unless you're just making propositions, saying that's an elephant, or that's a house, or that's a book, right? That cannot possibly be manipulation, right? So there are propositions and everything else, right? We might be able, I might be able to at some point argue that philosophy, pure philosophy, right, is not manipulative. But there has to be strict formats for how you present philosophy in order for it not to be manipulative, right? And that goes much into this way of arguing or presenting things without being manipulative in any way. How do you do that, right? There are a lot of words that they have built-in manipulation, right? It's like, what's the difference between a terrorist or freedom fighter, right? It might be the same person. One says it's a freedom fighter, another says it's a terrorist. What's the difference? It's the word, right? It's sophistry in a way, right? So, okay. If it is a human right to be educated, then this cannot apply to all human beings, since some people must be in the process of being educated, while others are in the process of educating them. In the same way, this right cannot exist contemporaneously for all human beings at the same time for the same reason. Also, the right to be educated is indefinable. Educated in what, for how long, to what degree, these questions cannot be objectively defined or answered, like all questions of degree. I like that. All questions of degree and objectivity. That's good. I like that. That's interesting. Maybe because it falls in my lap, but I want to connect the dots my way. No, but it's an interesting notion. These questions cannot be objectively defined or answered like all questions of degree. So a matter of degree cannot be objective. All questions of degree cannot be objectively defined or answered. That's actually one that is on the surface, it might not look that important, but this is very, very important, right? Objectively defined or answered like questions of degree. Now, questions of degree, right? What is actually a question of degree? This could be, I might take a stab at this one, even though it might take a little while, right? All the attributes of an object are matters of degree, right? Or at least attributes of an object. Each qualia has a degree of something, right? Color has a degree of something. Sound has degree of something. Taste has degree of something. Even feel or smell has a degree of something, right? Or even intensity or something like that, right? They are all matters of degree. There's not a sense data called color or not color, right? It's a degree of some color, right? So therefore, attributes of objects cannot be, sense data cannot be objective, right? It's right there. He's saying sense data cannot be objective. He's not saying it, but he is implicating it, right? So what is left? Only the objects, only the concepts, right? Only elephant, not the color or smell or taste of elephant, but elephant, the concept. That is what can be objective, right? It makes things so much simpler this way, right? Okay, let's say that 12 years of education is a human right. Why 12 and not 13 or 12 minus 1 minute? In other words, the human right to be educated is a right possessed by some at the expense of rights possessed by others. Two people cannot be simultaneously educating each other at the same time. One person cannot both be a teacher and a student at the same time. Thus, education cannot be a human right. Well, I'm not sure that your definitions of what entails a human right is sufficient to reject human rights, which is what I think you are trying to do, right? But we are there ant rights? Do ants have rights? Do they talk to each other, say, I have a right? What would that be, right? No, it's just manipulation. It's sophistry, right? Another kind of sophistry. Human rights? There are no human rights, right? There are no human rights. That you want there to be doesn't mean that there is human rights, right? Even that politician wants you to think that there are human rights so that they can get to steal something from somebody else and give to you and say, you have this right, and thereby keep the circus going, right? It doesn't mean that there are human rights, because there aren't. You can't go somewhere and look for human rights, right? Syllogistically, the argument looks like this. The argument for human rights, I suppose, right? Yeah. All human beings have the right to X. 2, some human beings must provide X. 3, those who must provide X cannot simultaneously receive X. Therefore, not all human beings can have the right to X. No, I understand. It's you can't universalize it, you could say, right? To follow Stefan Molyneux' chain of reasoning, right? If I have a right to something, I can't both be paying for it and have a right to it, right? It makes no sense, right? It's stupid, right? So, and it's a problem with democracy, right? Because democracy is, okay, well, there's enough of us who says that we have a right, so you're going to pay, basically, right? It's sort of majority dictatorship. Self-ownership, on the other hand, can be exercised by all human beings at the same time and can exist contemporaneously, and thus could be considered at least a property of humanity rather than a right, which is, to put it mildly, somewhat of a challenging concept in the realm of rationality. Absolutely. Defining definitions. Okay. That's interesting. He's attempting, apparently, I don't know, but let's see. He's trying to define definitions. but he's not making any definition anywhere in the book for all the terms he's using, right? It's like, duh. Okay, maybe I'm getting ahead of it, right? But let's see what he says. The art of the argument lies essentially in the question of definitions. Okay. It is not only an amateur mistake to avoid defining terms. That'll be great. Yeah. You haven't defined any terms, basically, right? It is an anti-rational mistake. Calling it a mistake is the kindest word I can think of, but it is seldom that innocent. Oh, okay, he's kicking his own balls now, right? For instance, if you are debating the existence of ghosts, people think that you only need to define the word ghost. This is false. No, it can't be false. Because it's not an object. I mean, It is even more important to define the word existence. Okay, but didn't you do that? Okay, oh, maybe he did. Yeah, okay. I'm so confused about what he's doing here, right? If you're trying to debate whether donuts are food, defining donuts is less important than defining what food is. There is a larger category called existence and a subcategory called ghosts. There is no point defining ghosts unless you first define existence. You cannot compare a null with a null or a null with an object. If I define donut exactly and when ask you whether a donut is in the category of flipper, surely you will tell me that the question cannot be answered. No, but it's like he's talking about this empirical reality, and he's basically talking about anything but empirical things when he's trying to argue for this empirical fantastic world he's having, right? So defining a donut, well, it doesn't matter because you have it's here, donut, see, right there, donut, you had identified it. That's objectivity, that's empiricism, right? Donut has taste, smell, sound, or whatever, right? Why do you need to define it? Shut the fuck up, just eat your freaking donut. It's right there, the donut is there, you have identified it, done. No more need to talk and confabulate or whatever it's called, right? For all comparison, debates, all terms need to be defined to the satisfaction of all parties. Once this is achieved, the debate is usually concluded very easily. Requiring definitions is our most fundamental weapon against sophistry. Yeah, I've been saying that for, like 80 pages, right? Oh, man. Sophists avoid definitions. Oh, fantastic. Yay. There you said it. Oh, they use a colorful language. Oh my God, this is so funny, man. Oh my freaking God, man. How can he not see what he's doing? And he's talking about sophists avoid definition and utilize colorful language. Okay, go back and listen to a few of my earlier videos in this series, and feast on his extremely colorful and language about Hitler speech, right? Go listen to them, right? It's almost like I want to go there and find them again, right? Let us see. He has been avoiding definitions all this time, right? Maybe he thinks he has done something along the lines of a definition, and there may be some approach to that, but it's not like he's sort of cutting it out in a where it needs to be. This is the definition. Definition of argument is this. He has done that with argument. Okay, let's take that, right? But argument is comprised of other things, right? Elements. And all these elements have not been defined, right? So you can say a house is made of bricks and glass and tiles and whatever. But if you don't understand what bricks and glass and tiles are, you're none the wiser, right? So He's not really defining anything in any form that I would accept as a definition. And then utilizing colorful language. He's not done anything but colorful language. And then these sort of mid-level self-discussion of various kinds of areas, like the argument and rights, and the element of the argument and empiricism, argument and existence, so these kinds of things, right? And but there's been a lot of colorful language, right? Particularly in the first fourth of the book. And he sort of slowed down on the level of colorful language, but it pops up now and then, right? So he's basically kicking himself, in his balls, and, like there's no tomorrow, right? This is, I mean, oh my God, he can't even see what he's doing. He's doing that exactly. He's saying that his book is a piece of garbage, right? He's basically saying that his book sucks to high heaven, right? To be a little, colorful in my language. It's like, oh man, no. This is a self-goal, right? Of the worst kind. Okay. Mankind shall not be crucified on a cross of gold in order to sway the emotions of the audience and so bypass their reasoning abilities. Anytime you see someone rush into a debate without first defining terms or refusing to be pulled back to the starting gate in order to define terms, you are most times viewing a ghastly, manipulative sophist. Well, then look no further, right? Look no further than this text. I learned this first while debating in high school and college, but later learned it much more painfully during my 15 years as a software programmer and entrepreneur. Specifications are the design elements of a potential software program. If specifications are agreed upon by a programmer and customer, then the software can be built for a tenth of the cost. All right? For a tenth of the cost? Whatever. In other words, changing specifications after the coding process is underway costs 10 times as much, and software is much less important than the argument. Consider common debate in society. Capitalism promotes inequality. Most people jump in at the deep end, truly a hole with no bottom, save the end of civilization, and start arguing about the current system and how to promote equality and so on. Capitalism simply means property rights and free trade without coercive interference. This definition is so incredibly far removed from the current Western economic system that calling it capitalism is like describing a random stabbing as emergency surgery. Yeah, I must admit, he has a bit of humoristic. He has a way of using words in a creative fashion that has a sense of humor to it. And I guess it's sort of a lively way. It gives it a little lively touch here and there. And that might not be completely out of the place, right? If you use it in the right place, this is one of the places I would say it's fine with a little fun, right? It's fine. Have a little laugh now and then. It doesn't hurt, right? For instance, Western governments enforce a coercive monopoly on the creation and distribution of currency, which is the lifeblood of all savings and investment and trade. If there is no free market in money, there's no free market at all. Well, I would agree. Also, what on earth do people mean by the word inequality? Do they mean inequality of opportunity, or inequality of outcome, inequality of height, or beauty, or intelligence, or ambition, or perseverance, or dedication? In a running race, everyone starts at the same place. That is equality of opportunity. If you want everyone to finish at the same time, that is equality of outcome. And in order to achieve that, you must change where people start or assign various burdens to the fastest runners. Here's a hint. Social justice means equality of outcome. Justice means equality of opportunity. Also, in any field of human productivity, a tiny minority of people produce the vast majority of output. This is described as the Pareto distribution in any productive group. The square root of the workers produces half the product. This means that if you have 10,000 employees, 100 of them produce half the value. Well, I guess it depends on how you define creating value, right? So it's a bit more complicated than that, but it says a bit about the who has smaller or lesser responsibility for securing that a specific product ends up being produced. It's not the guy who cleans the coffee machine that has the biggest influence, right? But the CEO who takes the big shot and says we're going in that direction, and then it pays off. Well, that has a big influence on, right? And that's why CEOs get paid a lot of money, because they have to take these decisions. And if they don't make good decisions, they're kicked out, right? So yes, there is, and that is also one of the reasons why communism would never work, because nobody will take responsibility, because you're not going to get any benefit that matches if they take a big responsibility, they won't get paid more than everybody else. So nobody is going to want to take any responsibility for creating value, right? That's why there's no value creation. It just grinds to a halt in a communist society, because everybody wants to avoid creating anything and just leeching off of everybody else. So also, when people argue capital leads to monopolies, what exactly are they talking about? What is a monopoly? Is it a voluntary preference that most people choose in the free market, or is it achieved through government force? Is it a monopoly like voluntary monogamy within a marriage, or is it a monopoly like being locked in a crazy person's basement? In debates in general, very few participants seem to have a clue, not only about definitions, but also about the essential requirements to even have definitions. When people talk about government, what are they talking about? Do they define government as a voluntary organization that reflects the reasoned will of the people, or is it the essential coercive monopoly within society? Without definitions, all is prejudice and manipulation. For instance, if the word capitalism remains undefined, then what fills in the definition for you? Why, your emotions, of course. If you like capitalism, you will think of it as a free and voluntary trade. If you don't like capitalism, images of exploitation or domination arise within you like Dickensian ghosts. If you are religious, the word God summons within you beatific image. I've never seen that word before. Images of universal power and benevolence. If you are an atheist, you see only a big mental squiggle of epistemological contradiction. If the word equality conjures images of the hungry being fed, the sick receiving medicine, the poor being housed, and so on, then you respond positively. If, on the other hand, the word brings to you images of totalitarian control, economically suicidal central planning, and mountains of dead bodies, well, you get the idea. Debates without definitions tends to magnify existing prejudice of those in the audience, those looking for cheap applause, and the suicide of irrational confirmation bias avoid definition like the plague. Those seeking truth and reality in general, that which opposes the self-serving bias of the masses demand definitions. Naturally, this does not mean that they will actually receive definitions, but putting in the requirement is an essential first step to eventual credibility. Well, he's talking about the importance of definitions when you argue and use words, that the words are defined. But apparently he does not need to define anything when establishing how you argue, right? There he does not need definitions at all, apparently, or very, very few, right? So it's like, okay, when you get to use my argument, the argument which I have presented without actually making any rigid definitions, it's very important that you define the terms you use within the argument. It's like, oh my freaking God, right? Complexity and definitions. The more complicated the debate, the more necessary the definitions. There is a meta definition necessary for all debates, hardly ever acknowledged, which is what on earth is the point of a debate. Almost a decade ago, I produced an 18-part introduction to philosophy series, wherein I defined the terms most necessary to philosophy: truth, reality, error, argument, fact, evidence from the ground up. The purpose of a debate is to compare the argument to the truth. Compare the argument to the truth. I'm not crazy about this, the truth, or the argument. Either person may succeed, both persons may fail, but they cannot both succeed, since having a debate means taking opposing, or at least incompatible positions. In any clash between two incompatible positions, only one can potentially emerge victorious. If we are lost, and you say go south and I say go north, we can both be right. Well, this is because that, as I said, if we are saying that's an elephant, there is no response except true or false, right? There is also I don't know in rare occasions, right? If you're talking about, if you're defining the Earth's shape as something that can be true, I wouldn't, but you could maybe do that, right? You could say, okay, if somebody said, I say the Earth is round or spheric, and then I would have to say, I don't know. You're pointing to the Earth, but it's so large that I can my experience can encompass the object. So I need the whole object to be experienced in order to deduct or deduce the shape of it, right? So it's not empirical to use my whatever induction I may have or created artificially about the Earth, right? So that's another point that is important with these inductions. If you ask 10,000 people in your nearest city, none of them would say that they have actually seen the shape of Earth, right? You can even take 1 million people possibly, right? And a billion people even, right? None of them would say that they have actually seen the shape of Earth, but 99.9% of them are convinced that the Earth has a specific shape. Why? If they haven't had empirical data, what lures them into the idea that it must be so? Well, because they were told so. They have seen photographs, they have seen movies, they have seen pictures, they have seen texts and so on, and heard stories. So all these things have molded their induction into the shape of Earth. And another important point is, whenever people have got a story that they are following, then they are not easily letting it go. If people saying, well, you can't know that the shape of Earth is spherical, right? Then they will say, but it is, and because there was a stick in Egypt, and a well, and the guy who looked down the well at midnight or whatever. Therefore, no. That is induction, right? That is science. That is not empiricism, right? You have to see the shape of Earth in order to know the shape of Earth. Done, right? Okay. How did I get here? I don't know. Let's see. Well, how far did I get? In any clash between two incompatible positions, only one can potentially emerge victorious. If we are lost, and you say go south and I say go north, we can both be right. We can't both be right. No, but as I said, most arguments are about sophistry and convincing rather than agreeing, right? If you're saying you have to convince, then you have a certainty, an apparent certainty about your convictions. Otherwise, you wouldn't try to convince anybody, because you would be sufficiently doubtful or skeptic about your own knowledge to say, yeah, I have my knowledge. That doesn't mean I should convince anybody else about my knowledge, right? So convincing is based on some kind of certainty. But if another guy is certain about something else in contradiction to you, well, then it becomes this kind of debate, right? But that's because everything is mostly sophistry and manipulation. The only thing that you have to hold on to is your propositions, right? and maybe philosophy to some degree, pure philosophy, right? The terms of the debate are far less important than the purpose of the debate. The purpose of the debate is to compare the argument to the truth. The methodology requires definition, reason, and evidence. The question of whether or not God exists is the juxtaposition of the concept of God to the empiricism of the senses, since we must understand that ideas in the mind are not the same as things in the world. God certainly exists as an idea within the mind. God certainly, but ideas in the mind do not exist. You are violating the idea of existence then, right? See, I mean, empiricism is existence. You have, as far as I understand, claimed that in the book, right? Or more or less said that. So you can't say that something that is only in your mind is also a kind of existence. Then you're violating the idea of existence. God certainly exists as a belief system. Churches and Bibles and priestly marks all exist. And religion has particular consequences to those who believe in God. But none of these issues are central to the question of God's objective existence outside the mind. Is he trying to cuddle up to Christians here, right? I think so. Concepts do not exist outside the mind, contra Plato. The abstract mathematical purities of a perfect circle, or 22 divided by 7, well, that's a very coarse approximation, or an infinitesimally small point, or E equals mc squared, do not exist in the tangible material realm any more than you can drive across the idea of a bridge or live in the concept of a house. In other words, a dictionary is not a mall. The argument is a conceptual explanation of things in the world. Where argument does not touch the world, it remains futile, abstract, merely self-referential. For me, the greatest condemnation of theory. The debater does not fundamentally test his propositions against the opponent, but against reality. If you are arguing with a friend about the best way to get to Las Vegas, you are testing your propositions against empirical geographic reality. That would be evidence, right? It's empirical in the sense that you are observing or experiencing objects, but these objects are not the thing you're going for. They are evidential towards your final goal, right? If you win the argument with your friend but end up heading in exactly the wrong direction, have you really won the argument? Well, that's a point, right? You may win the argument, but that doesn't make you correct, right? The immediate battle may be against your opponent, but the ultimate war is against unreality, anti-rationality, anti-empiricism. You can easily win the fight, but lose the war. Let me see how far this goes. Okay, I'll finish this, and then that's this part. The purpose of the argument is to get to Las Vegas, not to get your way. We wish to emerge victorious against error, not a mere opponent. If your goal is to get to Las Vegas, losing the argument if you are wrong gets you to Las Vegas. If your goal is to win the argument for reasons of vanity and insecurity, no doubt, then you would rather lose your way to lose the argument. Madness. There is no way to win the argument about the best way to get to Las Vegas without referencing the external world, without maps, GPS, or even looking out the window. The debate is the comparison of the propositions to reality, to truth, to objective empirical facts. To take an example, we are all familiar with, imagine you come to a T in the road and you turn on your GPS, but you don't know whether to go left or right. Your GPS generally cannot help you, since you cannot determine your direction prior to movement. You say go left, your friend says go right, and the GPS will shortly tell you which way is correct. But there's no correct way. It depends on how you want to go there, right? I mean, this kind of if X, then Y, right? If X, then Y. This then part is a fallacy. There is no only one solution to any if statement, right? If you want to go to Las Vegas, this is the only solution, right? It depends on how you want to get to Vegas, right? You have used this example also in another situation. I don't exactly remember where. I think it was in the debate with rationality rules, but okay. You see how important this is? You have a proposition, a hypothesis, an argument go left, go right, or go right, and objective reality determines which argument was and is correct. But it was your GPS. That's not objective reality. How could it be, right? You look at your GPS is an object, but what it tells you is not objective, right? I mean, it's not, from your standpoint, it's not objective because you're not experiencing, this is how you get to Vegas, right? It's like, man, you need to understand this because you're going into fallacious arguments about reality now, right? It's this, you want to have these certain solution. If this is the case, you must do this, right? It doesn't work. That's not how people work, right? There's no two ways of, there's no two identical, journeys to Las Vegas, right? It depends on the circumstances, right? It is possible that either going left or going right is the best course of action. Since neither option is logically contradicts, I want to step over this. I can't fucking talk about Las Vegas, right? Okay, which is the most okay. Building the case. Okay, we'll leave that for the next part. So that's all for now. See you next time.